Welcome back, viewers. It's a marvelous Monday morning. I do hope you feel blessed to be in the land of the living this morning. Sitting with me in studio is someone we are all very familiar with, and it's a pleasure to have her here with me in studio. Good morning, Dr. Angus.
Good morning, Natalie. Good morning to the people of Tobago and wherever else you're listening from.
And for some reason, if you are new to Tobago updates, and you don't know who this person is, she is Dr. Denise Sawyerfat Angus, former presiding officer of the Tobago House of Assembly and political leader of the Innovative Democratic Alliance. Did I get it right?
Yes.
So welcome again, Dr. Angus.
Thank you.
This morning, I want to start our discussion looking at you as a former presiding officer. We know that last week sitting, we had the minority leader walk out of the House, and of course, we had Adana and Senator Lawrence just discussing it before we came on set. And I want us to look a little more and for you to walk us through, because you would have the know-how in terms of how these procedures are. And the contention of the minority leader is that his motion was changed, and therefore he felt it was no longer his motion. So my first question to you, when members of the House submit motions, who does it go to and what's next?
Okay. So when members of the House submit a motion from any side, it goes to the clerk of the House, and the clerk of the House is then supposed to review it. And if there are grammatical changes or need clarity on one of the statements in there, that can be recommended, and it is submitted to the presiding officer. The presiding officer may agree with the clerk or not. Most times it's usually grammatical errors, you'll agree. And then, you let the mover of the motion know these are the grammatical errors that were changed, and you go forward with that.
Right. Does the presiding officer have the purview or the authority to change the spirit of one's motion?
Absolutely not. That would be considered abuse of your powers, which is what we would have seen in the House recently with this motion. Only the House has the authority to amend a motion. So the motion could have gone forward as long as there were no grammatical errors, as long as there was clarity in what was being put out in the motion.
Right.
And then the House would have the power to say, we want to amend this section to this, we vote on it, and the amendment would go through.
Right.
But the presiding officer does not have that authority so to do.
Right. I want us just to take a look at the video of what took place partially on that afternoon.
There are rules and regulations that guides the proceeding of this House. Should you have any queries, you are free to see me in chamber to discuss it. This cannot and will not be accepted. I expect you to apologize to the members of this House. Members, it should be noted that the minority leader has just grossly disrespected the chair and you, the honorable members of this House. I suspend this sitting for 5 minutes.
Okay, viewers, and we just saw where there was the walkout at the House. In terms of, let's go back now, I did not have access to the original motion and what was changed, but from what was shared in the public domain, the minority leader felt aggrieved. He felt that that was not his motion, and that is the reason he would have walked out. Now, is it customary for members of the House to remove themselves, during their own motion? I know there are times, even in the Senate, even in Parliament, there would be people who would do walkouts in protest. But let's look at the Tobago House of Assembly in terms of procedure and what has happened in the past. Is it customary for one to walk out when it's their own motion?
A walkout is a form of a protest, and you can protest at any point. I think it was evident that the minority was protesting what the the powers that the presiding officer took upon herself so to do. And therefore, the protest was, we walk out.
Right.
So a protest is a protest. And, you know, there's a deeper issue that we have here, which is what it was changed to.
Right.
And that is a dangerous amendment that was put in there by the presiding officer. Because had the House gone through with such a debate with that amendment, I don't know that any private sector investment, you know, company or any private sector interested in investing in Tobago would ever come back to Tobago.
Right.
Because essentially the amendment put the blame on the persons, the private sector entity, that they have now created negativity for the people of Tobago by their pulling out. And that, you know, how do you blame a private sector entity for whatever occurred with the people of Tobago because they pulled out? There's a reason why they would have changed their minds.
Right.
And I don't see a challenge in what was put there in the first place. It never said the negative comments came from the opposite side. It just stated that they pulled out because of the negative comments coming out of the community. Maybe they could have, she could have entertained with him and said, well, is it due to lack of adequate consultation? Is that something you'd like to put? But I didn't see anything with the current, with his original statement that was put there. And like I said, the presiding officer did not have the authority, and she abused her powers in order to amend. She cannot amend. The House amends.
Right.
She can treat with grammatical errors. She can treat with clarity to a statement, but she does not have the power to amend.
Right. And in understanding that and hearing you as a former sitting presiding officer who would know best in terms of the procedure of the House, do you think that it should have been dealt with in a different way? Or can it be dealt with? Is it that a discussion can take place with the person putting forward the motion if the presiding officer thinks that maybe changes can be done, or that is not her place?
No, well, that is what is supposed to happen.
Right.
If you are changing the, or you would like to suggest a change to the motion, the presiding officer is supposed to engage, whether she chooses to engage directly or through the clerk, engage the mover of the motion, the proposer of the motion, in a discussion as to further clarity on that segment. And even if the person resists, then the presiding officer should allow it. Like I said, it gets to the House. The House then has the opportunity to say, we are amending, or we would like to amend this, and you put it to a vote in the House.
Right. And going back to what I would have asked earlier, and you would have answered in terms of it being a form of protest, is it customary, because it would have been, well, this may become technical, because it would have been the minorities leader motion, although he would have said it's no longer his because it was changed totally. Is it the right approach to walk out or to show protest in that way?
I'm not sure what other way you would do it in that situation, because if it has been changed significantly, he does have the right to say, this is no longer my motion.
Right.
And so that he does have that right to say. And if he had entertained that and continued along with that change, then he would have been complicit in terms of creating a situation where private sector will not be inclined to want to invest in Tobago because of that line that was changed significantly, where it blames the private sector entity for the negative fallout on the people of Tobago.
Right. And I probably before this interview is over, I'm hoping I'm able to find that that difference, because as I mentioned, I didn't have the original motion that was submitted by Mr. Morris, and of course to compare it to the change that was done. But even so, we can, still talk about it, because it's important for us, I think, as a people to understand procedure. Many times we take a political side, but even outside of that, we need to be educated. We need to understand that, these things are supposed to go in a certain way, and then individuals have a right, to seek redress or to move forward. So I want to thank you, for you sharing with us.
I want to allude to something else, the unprofessionalism of the presiding officer in the chair at the time when she got back into the chamber to announce the adjournment. And, for a presiding officer leading the House to go into giggles and laughter while you're closing out this session was highly unprofessional. Highly unprofessional.
Right.
And, almost showing your political skirts.
Right.
Because I just could not believe when I looked at it. As a former presiding officer, it really hurts me at times.
Right.
I'm very disappointed to see the display in the House from that level of the highest office in the House.
Right. And as a former presiding officer and someone who has the experience, because we know that Ms. Taylor, assuming this position would have been the youngest presiding officer thus far, and you being more experienced, do you think it is within place for you to have a conversation with her, helping mentor her, guiding her?
I have had conversations with Ms. Taylor very early when the initial blunders were made. I had conversations with her several times, and 2 years out, we have this. You could see where she has grown stronger.
Right.
But they say power corrupts, and that is what we're seeing here, that she has taken further powers unto herself that she does not have. And it's quite unfortunate. And this is where, throughout the administration we're seeing. You're seeing it at the level of the legislature. You're also seeing it at the level of administration, the abuse of power that continues with this crop of politicians that we have on this island.
Right.
And there has to be some maturity that is brought into those offices, because we are going downhill very fast.
You mentioned the word maturity, and somehow I wish in our political sphere that many of our leaders would really, understand what maturity is and adapt it, because we don't see it. You hear our young people talk about, I don't want to be a politician, I don't want to get involved, if that is how we are expected to behave, So I think we should call on all our leaders, maybe not just political leaders, and hold them accountable for their attitudes and really encourage them to be mature. Before we go to the break, I just wanted you to advise. So here we have the presiding officer, and she may have made a mistake. Who does she go to seek counsel? Because in her mind, if she got this motion, and whether it's through the clerk, and she would have decided this is not the right way, I need to make changes. Is there somebody she goes to in terms of getting advice to understand, is this within my remit, if she's not sure?
Absolutely. I mean, she could have reached out to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. The clerk there could give advice, and I'm definitely sure the clerk in the Parliament would have said, no, this is totally unacceptable, that you are limited to grammatical errors. So she could have reached out to the clerk of the House in Trinidad, and I do know that we have adequate staff in Tobago. I don't know whether she would have sought advice from the staff in Tobago regarding the said issue, or whether she just went ahead with it. But I am sure that the staff members who are there between the clerk and the other members supporting the clerk's office, that they should have been able to appropriately advise on that, should she have taken it forward. And like I said, if she felt that she wasn't getting appropriate advice from them, she needed to go to the Trinidad Parliament and ask the clerk for some advice there.
Right, and a viewer is asking if the presiding officer can prevent Mr. Morris from returning unless he apologizes. Does she have that power?
Again, more abuse of power.
If she does that?
She doesn't have it. She can ask the members to send him to the Privileges Committee to further censor him.
Okay.
And that can be done, but that will be further abuse of the House, because clearly she first breached the standing orders. She first breached, the powers of the House.
Right.
And therefore you have to take all of that into consideration. He didn't just walk out on nothing.
Right.
He walked out in protest of something that was quite significant, something that should not be happening in the history of our legislature.
Right.
So,
all right, so viewer, I hope you got your answer. So the presiding officer doesn't have that power, but of course there's a course of action that can be taken, but it doesn't lie within her power, according to former presiding officer Dr. Denise Soyafat Angus. Viewers, we go for a quick break, and when we return, we continue this conversation. Welcome back to GMT, and we continue our conversation with Dr. Denise Soyafat Angus, and we're switching caps for her right now. I'm going to just chat with her as the political leader of the Innovative Democratic Alliance, and let's talk about what's been going on in our country nationally. The constitution reform. Where does the IDA fall in all of this? How do you think this process has been going? Because I think the review committee came sometime to Tobago. So just update our viewers on that process.
okay. So the IDA stands on the side of the people. Let's say it that way. And what we have been doing is I've had the opportunity to visit some communities alongside Dr. James and to hear back from people in the community
Right.
about what they want to see for themselves inside of the constitutional reform process. But I want to say from the start that this government has been quite disingenuous about wanting constitutional reform, because when you go back into research in the 1950s and 60s,
Right.
you would see that seeking constitutional reform, especially around election time,
Oh, yes.
is nothing new.
Yes.
It's nothing new. It's that dangling carrot all the time.
Right.
But the difference then is that you would see where they said they would take a motion was moved in the House to give rise to a committee that then would then review the constitutional reform.
Right.
So in some essence, you felt that, maybe they really wanted it to happen. In this case, you had a prime minister who decided on a committee and said, we will have constitutional reform. No consultation with the opposition, no consultation with Tobago, which involves, we are involved in that too. And you send a committee around. What do you expect to happen when it gets to Parliament?
Right.
And so perhaps one of the first issues they need to change in constitutional reform, apart from the preamble, is that there has to be a specific framework and process for calling constitutional reform.
Right.
Perhaps you may say every 20 years, that it must happen at least every 20 years, because
Right.
you're talking, a couple generations
Yes.
there. At least every 20 years. And it must be through a motion that is moved at the level of Parliament. So you have everyone there who can debate and say, yes, we are prepared to go through constitutional reform. This is the committee we are all agreeing on.
Right.
Because when you do it that way, you are assured a better chance and a better outcome of agreement on whatever is put forward in terms of the amendments to the Constitution. So that's number one. Secondly, when you go back into the history, you realize that since back then, they're saying, well, the House cannot be truly democratic.
Right.
If you have one person who appoints all of the senators on one side,
Right.
and then one person in the opposition who appoints the rest of the senators on the other side, how is that democratic to the people? And therefore, we're calling for a truly elected Senate, an all-out elected Senate, an elected Senate that has specific duties in terms of their oversight. That elected Senate would answer to the people and not answer to one man or one woman in this
To
situation.
the political parties.
Correct.
Right.
And therefore, that is how you get closer to true democracy. You get closer to true democracy when you limit the size of your executive. So not everybody sits in that executive. You have some members in the House who can then oversight their own people in
Right.
the executive,
Yes.
but that is what you need for true democracy. But throughout communities have been saying that they want to find a way to govern themselves. For too long, they have to wait for 30 years and odd for something that was promised to them in the community, and it's still not coming through.
And by that time, too, sometimes it becomes irrelevant.
Correct.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're saying, give us a small budget. We can manage our budget. We get to decide what are priorities in our community that we're going to manage. We get the opportunity to collaborate with other communities and determine how do we share our resources. And in order to do that, you would then have to define the borders of communities.
Right.
And again, give responsibility to maybe a senatorial body, excuse me, that then can, according to formulas, according to the resources produced by a community and the number of people there, you use that formula to determine how much that community gets.
Right.
You know, whether you're going to combine communities or you will have a community by itself because of the size of the community and the uniqueness of the community, that you will give them that amount of resources there. And so a community feels that it's guaranteed resources based on a specific formula and not somebody's personal political affiliation as to what they get. And so you have work specific for your senatorial body. You also provide for them to do oversight of the institutions that we have happening. You know, the whole thing, unfortunate with this whole baby deaths issue, you should have a senatorial body that is dedicated to oversight that. And you know they're doing it on behalf of the people and not just on behalf of, you know, a person. In addition to that, you want to and we're talking about the government mirroring the Tobago House of Assembly and Tobago House of Assembly mirroring the government. Because the current construct of the Tobago House of Assembly and even what is put in the bills, it would be dangerous to get the powers to do laws without a new design for the assembly.
And you know, we have to wrap up this, and I just want to go back to the point or the word you used earlier on maturity, because I'm hearing what you're saying, and it really would call for us to be more mature in terms of how we look at our politics, how we treated political parties and the leaders. But I am hopeful that our younger ones will get it right. Maybe the older ones are on a particular course and change may be hard for them, but I'm definitely hopeful, and I have faith in our younger generation that they would understand country first. You can have your political affiliation, that is your right, but country first, and let's work together to make our twin island a better place. So thank you so much, Dr. Angus.
Thank you.
All right, viewers, we go for a break, and when we return, we will have Ms. Natasha Second sitting with us, and we'll hear about a policy that is being introduced by the Division of Education. So stay tuned, we'll be right back.
The energy fill the sky.